Welcome back to the Football by Nico show. Today, we're going to be talking about my personal position rankings for every single position in the NFL. This is going to be a two-part podcast. First, today, we are going to be covering the positions on the offensive side of the ball. Next episode, we'll be doing defense and special teams. I will be giving you my rankings, reasoning, and criteria for evaluating these players. And putting together positional rankings is never easy. Everyone sees and values things very differently, so for each position, I'll state my criteria for evaluating it. Some of the things I value straight off the bat are going to be, your player's availability and health, and a player's versatility. For all of these players, the first criteria would be who I want on my team, pretty plain and simple. And at the end, I'll go over my first team offense as a whole. So let's start off with the quarterbacks. So for the quarterbacks, pretty simple. We're evaluating these guys on which quarterback I would want leading my offense currently. Starting off at number one is Josh Allen. Obviously, got a great arm talent, and he's a perfect mix, in my opinion, of a good mobile quarterback and a passing quarterback. He's trucking guys, hurdling guys, as well as hitting guys down the field for absolute bombs. Then next you got Patrick Mahomes, and then Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, both of those guys are going to take a little bit of step back without their wide receiver one, but they are the most talented quarterbacks. Mahomes and Allen, I can definitely see an interchange on the top spot, but I think that Josh Allen is kind of leapfrogged above Mahomes in my opinion because he's just been a better rusher and more dynamic player. I think that Mahomes was kind of struggling towards the end of the year and just, this year as a whole because they weren't able to really find their identity as a team so far. So I think that without Tyreek, they'll probably switch to a more run first offense and he won't be able to show off his talents as well as probably would like to. So I think the same thing can be said for Aaron Rodgers. Obviously they drafted new wide receivers in this draft, but I think that Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs is going to be a way better connection than anyone on the Packers or Chiefs. And then moving on to number four, we have Matthew Stafford. I think that I'm probably one of the only people that has Stafford ranked this high. I don't think he deserves to be in the top three. I think Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Aaron Rodgers should be anybody's top three. I don't think it's very up for debate to interchange. You can interchange, Josh Allen first, Patrick Mahomes second, Aaron Rodgers third. You can say, I want Rodgers first or I want Mahomes first, but I think that definitely should be everybody's top three right now. I think that Stafford, great quarterback, obviously just won the Super Bowl. But I think that, right under him, I have ranked Brady. And I think that he was working with the worst wide receiver core than Brady last year. Obviously he had Cooper Cup, the Triple Crown winner, but Cooper Cup was basically the entire offense. He didn't have another good wide receiver. That's why I think Allen Robinson for him next year is going to be way better than many people think. Van Jefferson was all right. He was kind of iffy. Didn't even he got about 800 yards. But when you look at Brady's wide receiver duo, Chris Evans, not Chris Evans. If you look at Brady's wide receiver duo, you got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and that is just probably the best duo in the league. Both are amazing receivers on their own, and even when one goes down, he has the other one. And he also had Antonio Brown last year for maybe about 3/4 of the year before he quit. Shows who the better quarterback was in that situation. And moving on to six, we have a couple young guys, 6 and 7, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson. Justin Herbert's one of my favorite young QBs. I think that he's going to be great and he has the ability to move up on my list. But I think for now, I do need to see a little bit more of him. A lot of people I see ranking Herbert, they rank him pretty high because of his talent and like what he could be. That's why I'm ranking him a little bit lower than most people. Just because he's not that proven yet. I know he's got a good wide receiver core to throw to. He's got, and he's got Austin Eckler in the backfield. But I think that overall, he's got a very good arm talent. He's got mobility. He's got all you need to succeed in a modern quarterback build. And I think that he's going to do way better this next season with all the additions they've had on both sides of the ball. And then 7, Lamar Jackson, obviously the MVP in 2019, one of the most dynamic players recently. And I think that if you definitely have to rank him inside your top 10 for sure. He's a little bit lower because obviously he's not as good of a passer as the ones before him, but he's such a dynamic player that you just have to rank him pretty highly. I mean, the guy won an MVP simply because of his dynamic ability as a player, as a rusher, as a passer. But personally, I would rather have someone like, Josh Allen or even Justin Herbert who can pass better, because that's a quarterback's first job, is to pass instead of just, taking it on himself and running. I do like Lamar. I'm not a Lamar hater, but I think as a quarterback, your first read should be to pass instead of just to run and take it. I think now in the modern league, you have to be a mobile quarterback to be one of the best. And I think that even Rodgers has some mobility. Same thing with Matthew Stafford. You can have mobility to move out of the pocket, but you have to have some sort of mobility to be a good quarterback nowadays. And Lamar is the most mobile out of all these in the top 10. Moving on to number 8, got Russell Wilson, obviously in a new situation, probably the best situation he's been in years, with, great wide receiver core, decent offensive line, new offensive minded head coach. And Russell Wilson, as a Rams fan, I can tell you, has carried the Seahawks single handedly on his back for the past, since ever. I think that he's going to do pretty well in Denver, but who knows? They let Russ cook might not be good when you got Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert at the top of the division. But I think that he's still a great quarterback. He's got some mobility. I think he just never was able to put it together in Seattle, probably because a little bit of Pete Carroll, a little bit of himself. I think that the reason he doesn't do as well as he should is because he holds onto the ball for longer than he should. I know Aaron Donald definitely got to him a couple times, when I was watching Rams versus Seahawks games, because he was holding on to it for so long, trying to find an open receiver down the field. And that's just, you just go, why, Russ? But I think that he'll do better next year. He's still top quarterback in the league for a while. And I think that the first 6 weeks of the season, he'll be an MVP candidate. So there's that as well. And moving on to 9, we have Deshaun Watson. Just not taking into account anything that's going on for him off the field right now. And I think that he's another one of those guys that are top in the league, at least should be in someone's top 10. Led the league in passing a couple years ago. And I think that he's still, even though he's taken some time off, I think that he's still the same player who he always was. But, just disregarding all the stuff that's going on for him off the field, great talent, great arm. Not as mobile as some other players, but still a very mobile quarterback. He can get out of the pocket. He can make those throws. I think everybody saw those videos of him where he was, had the black eye and he was making a throw while getting kicked in the face. So I think that he's 4,823 yards in 2020, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. And that was on a pretty bad Texans team as well. And I think that now that he's on the Browns and they have probably the best team he's ever had around him, he got Amari Cooper, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, great offensive line. He's going to be way better than he was on the Texans. And I think that if he plays the full 17 game season, that he'll do way better than many people expect him to do. Rounding out the top 10 quarterbacks, I've got Joe Burrow. Now you might be thinking, he's a Joe Burrow hater because he's a Rams fan. That's not really the case. I think that Burrow is a good quarterback. I think that he's better at some things than he is at others. I think that he's kind of more of your traditional pocket passer, similar to a Phillip Rivers, just because of the fact that he's kind of mobile. I know he kind of rolls out in the pockets. He's got similar mobility, I would say, comparable to Matthew Stafford. But I think that he's got a good arm talent. He tore up the Ravens anytime they played this year, beat the Chiefs. He's thrown for lots of yards with that good wide receiver core. But that's the thing, is when you have a trio like he has up in Cincinnati, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, I think that it's hard to compare him to someone like Aaron Rodgers, who only had Devontae Adams and nobody else, because he has so much help around him in the passing game, in the wide receiver room, that it's hard to say that if he's a better talent, because we haven't really seen him without that help. I mean, if you look at his stats before he got hurt in 2020, they looked pretty average. I mean, he was a rookie QB coming in to a pretty okay Cincinnati team. I mean, they're kind of middle of the pack at the time, but played 10 games, a little bit less completion percentage, and he averaged 6.7 yards, 13 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Let's say you about double that. That's still pretty an average quarterback season, I would say. Around 30 touchdown passes, 10 interceptions. Nothing special when it comes to stat wise, but he's still one of the young stars in the league. I would definitely take Justin Herbert over him, but I'm just not sure about his ability as a quarterback compared to some of these other guys on this list. I do think he's better than Kyler Murray. I will say that. I think that he's proven that he can win big games and, be mature about the situations in the locker room, that kind of stuff. I would rather have Joe Burrow than Kyler Murray, but I think that overall he's just not as good as some of the other guys I've ranked above him. Now moving on to running backs. Running backs, I evaluated them on yards, I evaluated them on how explosive they were, and I evaluated them on durability. I think that durability is a big thing for any players, especially running backs. Now that there's a workhorse running back, a lot of teams use one, and I think that when teams use one, the starter ends up getting hurt at some point. I mean, we saw with Derrick Henry last year. You don't want that, obviously. I don't think any player wants to get hurt, but when you're being used like Christian McCaffrey was a couple years ago when he was on the field about 90% of the time, that's when you get the players that, get injured because of that, because they're just taking so many snaps. One, obviously, is going to be Derrick Henry. He's just too great of a player to be ranked anywhere lower than 2, I would say. If you have him lower than 2, I don't know what you're doing with your rankings, because he's the best running back in the league, no doubt about it. I think that even though, like I said, the Titans give him such a high volume of carries, he still was able to hold up for so long without getting hurt. And just the fact that he was so good as well just goes to show you what kind of player he is. And even for a while, if I just looking at the stats from last year, only played in 8 games and still ranked 9th in rushing yards compared to the people around whom we played 10 plus games I'm looking at. And that's just crazy to think about, that he went out about, what was that, week 9, and still ranked 9th above Damian Harris, Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler, Javonte Williams, and Alvin Kamara, and is still that high in rushing yards. I mean, had that season a couple years ago where he was just absolutely transcendent as a player. And anytime he plays the Jaguars, beware of a nice stiff arm, because this dude is powerful, he's explosive, and he just kind of runs over dudes, which is why I have him ranked at number 1. Number 2, I've got Jonathan Taylor. Obviously had that great season last year. I think that he's going to be a great running back when it comes to all the things I mentioned above: yards, explosiveness, and durability. I think the Colts have a pretty good situation for him with a good offensive line and, a good backup running back with Nyheim Hines. So I think, they're not going to try and put the pressure on him. He obviously had that great game at Buffalo. I think that was a good indication of how good he can be when they rely on him. But I think that he shouldn't have to be the Colts offense all the time. Obviously, they had some offensive struggles last year with Carson Wentz at QB. But when he was most of their offense last year, he was doing great. Just the fact that he was juking guys, he was mobile, he was powerful as a runner. I think that his very muscular frame allows guys to bounce off him really well. And I think that next year, going into year 3 now? Year 3, 4? He'll be much better as a runner. He has a full season of what he just did, and he can just do that again and improve on it. He's great young running back in the league. Only reason I don't have him ranked higher is because we need to see another good year from him to truly say that he can be the best running back in the league. Number 3, I got Dalvin Cook. Obviously, another running back that's been a great running back these past couple of seasons. Ranked 5th in rushing yards last year, 1,159. long of 66 yards, which was pretty decent as well. And you just look at the Viking situation. They're using him as a workhorse. They're using him as pretty much a 3 down plus back. I think that he's a very great player. I think that people underestimate him because they always say, "Oh, he can't stay on the field," which is why he's ranked a little bit lower than those other two guys. But I think when he's on the field, he's one of the best like running backs in the league. I think he's a very dynamic player. I think that when he's on the field for the Vikings, they do much better than when he's off the field, obviously. And just moving on to number 4, we got Nick Chubb. I think that Chubb is another great player. It was very hard for me to choose between Dalvin Cook and Nick Chubb. I went with Dalvin Cook because Dalvin Cook's a little bit more dynamic in my opinion. I think that Nick Chubb's an amazing player. I think the fact that he shares snaps with Kareem Hunt and is still able to put up good numbers just goes to show you what kind of player he is. He was second in the league in rushing yards last year. Only played 14 games as well. So that goes to show you what type of player he is, and the fact that he didn't play all the games, shares snaps, isn't a run-first offense, so you can count that against him, I would say. But he averaged 5.5 yards a carry, almost led the league, and he was just great last year, has been great every year since he was drafted. And I think that he'll continue to be great as long as the Browns have a good offensive line in front of him, even no matter who the quarterback is. A full 16-game season or 17-game season now in a while just goes to show you how the Panthers kind of ran him into the ground almost, which is pretty sad to say. But if he can't play a full 16-game season or 17-game, if he can't play a full 17-game season next year, I think that's probably it for him, honestly. Because you look at his season stats from last year, 99 attempts, 442 yards, 1 touchdown, 4.5 average. That's not looking great. And that's just because he got injured again. And he was doing good for a while there. He had that 1,000 yard season, 1,000 rushing yards, 1,000 receiving yards, and he was basically the Panthers' entire offense for a while. But the last time he played a 16-game season was 2019. Played 3 games 2020, 7 games last year. And he just hasn't really looked the same since. But out of these 5 guys I've ranked so far, he definitely has the highest ceiling. The only thing for me ranking him this low is just because of his injury concerns. If a player can't stay on the field, he's not going to be as good as a player who can stay on the field. And that brings us to number 6, similar player to Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara is one of those pass-catching, versatile backs, higher ceiling than what he's ranked right now. But, you don't really know with Mark Ingram there now again. Don't know who the quarterback's going to be. I think Alvin Kamara kind of dropped off after Drew Brees left because Drew Brees loved getting him that ball. But overall, Kamara's still a great player. I think that he's one of my favorite players for sure to watch, which is the fact that they line him up wide. They use him in all sorts of different ways. That was something I mentioned I really like in a player's versatility. And Alvin Kamara is very versatile as a running back. Just the fact that, the Saints use him in a lot of different ways and try and get him the ball as much as possible is good for his stats and stuff. He's probably one of those guys that if he does better next year with Jameis, I would move him up a slot to in front of Christian McCaffrey. Moving to 7, got Joe Mixon. Mixon's an interesting one because, again, he was injured for a while. And I remember lots of people probably remember drafting him in fantasy just for him not to play the whole season. He's played 16 games last year, 6 in 2020, 16 in 2019, and then 14 the 2 years before. But he's been pretty good when he plays a full season. 1,000 yards in each of the years he's played a full season. 13 touchdowns last year, breakout year for them. Obviously, the Bengals went to the Super Bowl. And I think that he was a big part in that, taking some pressure off Joe Burrow, being a threat in the backfield when, they have the threat of the trio, Chase, Higgins, Boyd in the passing game. It's also good to have a threat in the backfield so that, people don't focus in on just that wide receiver trio. And I think that Mixon was that for the Bengals last year. And now moving to 8, another one of those good pass catching backs, Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler, great dynamic player for the Chargers. He's been great his entire career. Missed a little bit of time with injuries, but I think his ceiling, we kind of saw his ceiling last year. Last year was one of his better years. Obviously, he's not one of those guys that gets a bunch of rushing yards, but he's so involved in the passing game that he doesn't really need to get rushing yards. Played 16 games last year, 10 in 2020, 16 in 2019, 911 rushing yards, 647 receiving yards. So he's one of those guys that definitely is split more out wide and in the passing game than some of these other guys. But I think that versatility is a great thing for players like Austin Eckler because, you get some of those dump offs, you get some of those easy catches, and you can just take him for lots of yards. Did score 12 rushing touchdowns, career high for him, and then 8 on the receiving end last year. So I think that he's just that dynamic of a player that you can either throw him the ball, run the ball with him, and you'll have success either way. And I think that he can be even better next year and has the ability to move up in my rankings if he does so. Coming in at 9, got Najee Harris. Najee Harris, great rookie year. One of the best rookie, if not the best rookie running back last year. Obviously, the Steelers are kind of using him as a workhorse running back, which is going to inflate his stats a little bit when he's on the field most of the time. But I think that his vision, everything about him is just really complete for a rookie. Rookie running backs are obviously going to be better than some of the other rookie positions like wide receiver or quarterback. But I think that he was showing that last year that he's ready to play with the big guys. And the Steelers have a great situation for him. Young quarterback, young running back. They're still building their team kind of around these core players, and Najee Harris is one of those core players. Moving to 10, we have Zeke. Zeke obviously would probably be way higher on this list if it was maybe 3-4 years ago. But I think that Zeke's age is kind of starting to get to him. Cowboys kind of ran him into the ground, so to speak. I think that he's still a good running back. I'm not going to say that he's terrible or washed or anything like that because he still ranked 7th in rushing yards last year, played all 17 games, 1,002, just barely went over that 1,000-yard hump. Averaged 4.2 yards a carry, 10 touchdowns. Great season for a running back, but if you just kind of watch him play, he's pretty average now. He's not the player that he once used to be. And I think that's because, Dallas's offensive line has gotten much worse. I think that his age, just the fact that they've been using him a lot has kind of worn him down a bit. I think that Tony Pollard behind him might be better in certain situations. But I think overall, he's a player that could very well bounce back next year. And they were saying, there's reports that's going to say Zeke looks great, but he's just not the player he used to be. So I think that's why he's ranked here. He's still ranked in my top 10, just not the player he used to be. Moving on to wide receiver. For wide receivers, I like to evaluate route running, hands, and separation from the DB. I think that those 3 are pretty much the core pillars of what every wide receiver wants to do. Obviously, you want to have good route running, you want to have good hands for catching, and you want to get separation so you can get more wide open. At number 1, pretty sure most people have him at their number 1, Davante Adams. Got traded to the Vegas Raiders from the Packers. I think that that'll do good things for him, but he also is leaving a Hall of Fame quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. I think that it'll open up more things for him, not just being that number 1 target in the offense like he was with the Packers. He was getting a lot of their target share up there in Green Bay. Just having Darren Waller and a great wide receiver too and Hunter Renfrow behind him, he'll do better things. But we're just talking about strictly talent. I want Davante Adams. At number 2, another traded wide receiver this past offseason, Tyreek Hill, Kansas City to Miami. Tyreek Hill is another one of those dynamic players that is very fun to watch. Obviously, the cheetah, he's super fast. Patrick Mahomes was just bombing it down to him. You got that meme that says, F it, Tyreek's down there somewhere. And that's kind of true in some situations if you watch his highlights enough where Patrick Mahomes was just bombing it downfield because Tyreek absolutely sped past the DB. And I think that Tyreek is going to be in an interesting situation next year because Tua is still developing as a quarterback. He's still finding his way in the NFL. He called out his haters the other day saying, "You saw that one from a couple weeks ago. Everyone was criticizing that. Check out this dot to Tyreek I had earlier." I think the Tua will do okay with Tyreek. I know, like Tyreek said, he had Matt Moore for a while, quarterback, and did fine. I think that he won't be as good as he was with Patrick Mahomes, but I think he'll still be pretty good. We're talking about just like talent, obviously. I want Tyreek over some of these other guys. And then coming in at 3, we have the Triple Crown winner, Super Bowl champion Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp is one of those guys that maybe isn't as talented as the top 2, but still gets, the stats to back it up. I think that last year showed that with a good quarterback, that can help any wide receiver. Obviously, with Jared Goff, he didn't have the best of situations. Now that he has Matthew Stafford, wants to get the ball to him, knows where he is at all times. That helped him a ton. The only reason I have Cooper Kupp this low is because of his situation. I think that the Rams offense is built around getting Cooper Kupp the ball. He is their number one target. He is who the offense runs through. I think that last year showed that Matt Stafford to Cooper Kupp connection was amazing. But I think that in terms of physical talent and route running, all that stuff I mentioned before, Cooper Kupp just comes in at 3 for me behind those two guys because he's not as dynamic of a player as Adams or Hill. So I think that he's still a great player. Don't get me wrong. Just not cracking the level that some of those other guys are at yet. Moving on to 4, one of my favorite young players in the league, Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson, obviously from the Vikings. Justin Jefferson is probably the best young receiver in the league. Drafted as part of that Stephon Diggs trade a couple years ago. Probably one of the most even trades in recent memory. Bills got Stephon Diggs. Vikings got Justin Jefferson. I think that Justin Jefferson is probably the better receiver than Stephon Diggs right now. You'll see why I have Stephon Diggs ranked on my list in a couple spots. But I think that Justin Jefferson, I'm ranking him just due to the fact that he shared time with Thielen. He's not the number one target really on offense his rookie year, but he came in, balled out. They learned that he was that guy and just started peppering him with targets more. In year 2, he did way better. And I think that he's just going to show some more growth going into year 3 now. And just the fact that he's got that talent, he's got, the swagger, he's got all the things I mentioned in my criteria, just puts him at number 4. And just keep in mind as well that when you look at quarterbacks for wide receivers, that's something that's really important to look at as well when evaluating, wide receivers, is what quarterback is throwing to them. That kind of shows you what talent a wide receiver has, is if they can make any quarterback look good. I think that's pretty important. You look at Justin Jefferson, he's making Kirk Cousins look better than he really is. Devontae Adams with Rodgers, Tyreek Hill was with Patrick Mahomes, Cooper Kupp's with Matt Stafford now. Great quarterbacks in the top 3. Justin Jefferson cracks the top 4 because he makes Kirk Cousins look great. And I think that it's a very symbiotic relationship. Quarterback can't do good without his wide receiver and vice versa. But just moving into number 5, we have DeAndre Hopkins. And I think that Hopkins was a guy that played with a bunch of random bad quarterbacks for most of his career until he got Deshaun Watson. You had Matt Schwab. You had Brock Osweiler, just off the top of my head, some of them. And he was one of those guys that even though he had those terrible, terrible quarterbacks down in Houston, he still balled out and he was still a great receiver. And just moving from Houston to Arizona, you kind of saw a little bit of a change from him because now he's kind of getting up there in age. Isn't the same player he really used to be. That's why I have him ranked at 5 because we haven't really seen the same production from him in Arizona that we have in Houston. I don't think him and Kyler Murray really had that much chemistry. I don't think that they connect as well as they should. I mean, Christian Kirk led the Cardinals in receiving last year, even though DeAndre Hopkins is supposed to be the number 1, didn't play every game. Again, that's that availability thing that I've talked about a couple times before. And that's pretty big for me because availability is the best ability. So I think that he's one of those great young wide receivers in the league right now. Don't think he's better than Justin Jefferson just yet. I think personally I need to see similar production from him next year to kind of determine which of them two is the better receiver. I know that game he had against the Chiefs was absolutely crazy. I don't think Justin Jefferson has done anything just like that yet, but he kind of got locked down in a couple games. I know that he wasn't the best all the time. I know Justin Jefferson is a little bit more complete than he is in terms of, route running, that kind of stuff. So I think that if he's able to show growth in year two, if he's able to show, hey, I'm not going to be kind of a boom or bust wide receiver for the most part, and just kind of, show that he's not just one of the big play guys. He can be, split out wide. He can come into to catch screens. He can do all sorts of things. Be more versatile. I would rank him higher than D Hop for next year. And then moving to 7, I have Stephon Diggs, who, like I mentioned before, was traded pretty much for Justin Jefferson. I think that Diggs is an interesting one because he was again with Kirk Cousins and Adam Thielen, but when he moved to Buffalo, he kind of got better in a sense because he was with Josh Allen, much better quarterback. He kind of helped Josh Allen make that jump the year that he got there. So I think that he was a big deal when he came in 2020, played all 16 games. He'll continue to do and play at that same level. But just when we're talking about talent, great route runner, I'm not so sure about everything else that I mentioned up there. Not as versatile as some of these other guys, but overall, he's one of those guys in Buffalo that they like to double team a lot. So I think that if he's able to beat it most of the time, that's why we saw get a lot of Gabe Davis in the playoffs. So I think that he's ranked a little bit lower just because of the fact he's not able to beat double teams all the time. And just overall still a solid player. It's very hard to rank wide receivers because wide receivers are plentiful these days. It's a passing league, so it was pretty hard for me to kind of rank this top 10. And that's why I was just going off of route running, hand separation as my top categories because those are the basic things you want from wide receivers. I think that there could easily be a very different top 10 from person to person. So it's just important to kind of rank what you value the most. And that brings us to number 8, Keenan Allen. Now, Keenan Allen is a guy that's very underrated, in my opinion. I think that he's one of the better route runners in the league. I think that he helped Justin Herbert a lot in his rookie year and last year included. And him and Mike Williams are probably one of the better wide receiver duos. I would say probably top 5 in the league, maybe even top 3. And overall, just a solid player. He's been a good veteran presence on the Chargers. And I think that he's played at a high level and been very consistent for such a long time that you can say he's top 10 in the league for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if some people rank him within, the top 7. But for me personally, not as good as, some of those other guys, not as transcendent or dynamic of a player. He's reached 1,000 yards in the past 5 seasons, except for last year where he had 992, but he didn't play all the games. So I think overall, you look at Keenan Allen on the LA Chargers, mind you. San Diego Chargers wasn't. Since 2013, there's a consistent veteran presence you have on the Chargers. Overall, solid player. Moving on to Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin's a guy that I think was very hard to rank. Between him and Mike Evans, I think that they're pretty close. I would say they're 1A, 1B on the Bucks. I think Chris Godwin is a little bit better than Mike Evans. Mike Evans I'll give him an honorable mention in terms of how good he is compared to the rest of these guys. But I think that Godwin is one of those guys that's a little bit more dynamic. He had 1,103 yards last year, 5 touchdowns, averaged 11.3 yards a catch. And overall, he's a more dynamic, faster kind of receiver than Evans is. Evans is more of that jump ball kind of guy. So I think, but hasn't really been the transcendent player that some of those other guys have been when they're on the field. Overall, still a solid player, still cracks, the top 4. But I'm looking for some more consistency from George Kittle. Played on ESPN, it's telling me he played 1 game last year, which is not what you want from your star tight end. Hasn't played a full 16 since 2018. and just goes to show you how injured the Niners get no matter what. Now, number 5, got Dallas Goedert. Goddard was a guy, that was been kind of relegated to the tight end 2 in the Eagles behind Zach Ertz for a while. Now, last year he was obviously traded, but I think that he's going to be a big target for Jalen Hurts next year. I think that he's a great receiving tight end. He's a great blocking tight end, and just overall solid all-around tight end. He cracks the top 5. Then you have TJ Hawkinson, injured last year. Great rookie year. Great the year after that. And next year on the line should be great just because Jared Goff was playing some good football at the end of the year. So it'll be nice to see how him and Jared Goff connect. 7, got Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts was one of those like generational tight end prospects coming out of college, but you're not going to be having that great of a career when you're on the Falcons. And currently, I'm not going to say I'm not going to predict how the Falcons season is going to go next year, but I think that it's not going to go as well as they want it to. I think that Pitts is going to be their main target for sure, but if you look at the rest of their wide receivers, Drake London's pretty much the only other viable target. I can't even name you a Falcons receiver off the top of my head. Most of them either left or, Calvin Ridley suspended. So he's going to be a main target in their passing game. And he was pretty decent last year. He showed, lots of promise for a rookie tight end. And I think that he'll continue to grow as a player. At 8, I've got Mike Gesicki. Gesicki is one of those guys that you always see on like highlight reel catches for the Dolphins. Making those crazy athletic catches, and like having Tua as his quarterback kind of hinders him a little bit. But I think that him and Tua will be able to connect next year a lot and kind of help him be a safety blanket in the passing game. So I think that Gesicki is one of those guys that's a little bit underrated in terms of when you talk about tight ends. At 9, I've got Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz, Super Bowl champion. Great run with the Eagles. Now he's on the Cardinals. Did pretty good on the Cardinals, actually. I was pretty surprised to see that he was doing pretty well on a new team like that. So I think he's kind of getting up there in age. I think the age is catching up to him a little bit, but still doing pretty good on the Cardinals. And I think that him and Kyler Murray will do better next year. But obviously they have a guy in waiting in Trey McBride. So be interesting to see how that shakes out over there in Arizona. Coming in at 10, finishing out the tight ends list, you have Noah Fant. Noah Fant is one of those guys that kind of never had a great quarterback to throw to him, but he still was doing pretty good for what he had. On the Broncos, had Bridgewater and Locke, obviously, but he was one of those guys that was shipped to Seattle as part of the Russell Wilson trade, so now he still gets Drew Lock and Geno Smith now. I'm not sure who's going to start there yet, but still, obviously, none of them are on the same level as Russell Wilson would have been. Still a great talent. Obviously, those Iowa tight ends are built a little bit different, have 3 making my top 10. So just goes to show you what kind of talent he has for playing with such subpar quarterbacks his whole career. Moving on to the offensive line, pass block, penalties, run block. But overall, on my offensive line rankings, I think it does a really good job of showing how an offensive lineman performs in any given game or period, because it's like how many times are they winning their snaps versus how many times are they losing. Starting off the offensive tackle position, I have Trent Williams. Trent Williams, one of those top tier offensive tackles on the Niners now. I think everybody saw that crazy video of him going in motion. That was insane. I think that the athleticism he has is great. I think that's why I ranked him at number 1. Number 2, we have Ryan Ramczyk from the Saints, another great offensive tackle. He was just signed a couple years ago, and they should have him around for the long term now, which is great because he's another one of those great players at offensive tackle that's just a staple on your offensive line. If I were to rank Andrew Whitworth in here from last year, I would rank him at number 2 because he was playing some of the best football of his career last year. He had something crazy like a 97 pass block win rate, which was insane for his age and to the fact that he retired as well. Number 3, I've got David Bakhtiari. Bakhtiari is an interesting one because he's another one of those injured kind of guys recently. So it'll be nice to see him back next year. I think that him and Rodgers are one of those. I think that him and Rodgers are one of those duos that you kind of like to see in the NFL. Tristan Wirfs, great as a rookie, still great in his second year. And I think that he's going to show some improvement going into I believe it's 3 now. So he was one of those guys that helped the Bucks in their Super Bowl run, and I think that he was a big reason why Brady wasn't getting hit as much. And I believe he was out in the game with the Rams, which is why you saw Brady getting hit that game a lot. 5, I've got Lane Johnson. Lane Johnson from the Eagles has been just a consistent force there. He's been great for them in terms of locker room. He's been great for them in terms of playing. So I think that he's an underrated offensive tackle when we're talking about offensive tackles. 6, I've got Teron Armstead from the Saints, now in the Dolphins. I think that just goes to show you how good of a player he was when he was playing with Ryan Ramczyk on the other side, and he was protecting Drew Brees. Now they paid him a massive contract down in Miami to keep Tua safe, and I think that it's definitely worth it. But overall, I wouldn't rank him as high as some of these other guys. And I think it's pretty crazy how the Saints had 2 of my top 10 tackles at the same time. 7, got Tyron Smith from the Cowboys. Cowboys obviously had a great offensive line for a while there. Tyron Smith and Zach Martin were obviously a big reason for that. But I think that he's one of those guys that kind of has been hurt in recent years. So I think he's a little bit ranked lower than how he performed in past years. Same thing with my next pick, Ronnie Stanley. Injured past couple of years. Great player when he plays. Number 9, I've got Rashawn Slater. Second All-Pro as a rookie. Did a great job protecting Justin Herbert last year. Number 10, here's what might be a surprise to some of you. I have Braden Smith from the Colts. He was top 5 in pass block win rate and run block win rate. So I think that just goes to show what kind of player he is. His run block snaps as well as his pass block snaps. So that's just all you want in an offensive lineman. And I'm just throwing out some honorable mentions to Jordan Mailata and Rob Havenstein. Great years last year, so just had to recognize them. Those would be my next 2 in order. Now let's talk offensive guards. Same criteria as the offensive tackles. Pass block and run block win rate. Number 1, Zach Martin. One of those Cowboys offensive line pieces that's been doing so well. Number 2, Elgton Jenkins. I didn't really know where to classify him as because I know he's played pretty much every position on the offensive line. Just classified him in with the offensive guards. But I think that he's one of those players, like I talked about before, is that it's very versatile and you can kind of put him anywhere on the line and he can do well. So I think that that's why I ranked him here at number 2. 3, I got Quentin Nelson. Great pick from the Colts and just been pancaking guys ever since he got drafted. 4, I got Joel Bitonio from the Browns. 5, I've got Joe Thuney from the Chiefs. 6, Wyatt Teller. Him and Joel Bitonio. Great duo. Browns have such a good offensive line. 7, I've got Shaq Mason, now on the Bucks, was traded this past year. 8, I've got Michael Onwenu from the Patriots. One of the better Bill Belichick draft picks in recent years. Has been good for them on the offensive line so far, and it'll be interesting to see how he grows in his next couple years. 9, I've got Brandon Sheriff. Got paid big money from the Jags. I don't know if he's worth that much money, but still a top 10 offensive guard. 10, I got Chris Lindstrom from the Falcons. An honorable mention to Ted Karras from the Bengals. Now let's talk centers. At number 1, I've got Corey Linsley. I think that he's one of those guys that the Chargers went out and got just to protect Justin Herbert, and I think that's what he was able to do so well. Number 2, I got Frank Ragnow from the Lions. Number 3, Creed Humphrey from the Chiefs. Great rookie year. Still very disappointed that my Rams didn't pick him, but just to go out there as a rookie offensive lineman, mind you, and just perform at the level of the starters that have been doing it for years is crazy. At number 4, I got Jason Kelce. Been a consistent force on that Eagles offensive line for a couple years. And I think that he's one of those guys that adds to that veteran presence on the Philly offensive line. Between him and Lane Johnson Great duo right there. 5, I got Ben Jones from the Titans. 6, J.C. Treader, now a free agent, used to be on the Browns. I'm not exactly sure why they cut him because he was still a very good player. 7, Ryan Jensen from the Bucs. 8, Rodney Hudson from the Cardinals. Raiders shouldn't have let him go for that much. Still one of the top centers, even if he is kind of getting up there in age. 9, David Andrews from the Patriots. 10, Ryan Kelly from the Colts. Again, that Colts offensive line is crazy good. And honorable mention to the Rams' Brian Allen. Still did really good last year. To wrap up this episode, let's go over my first team offense. At quarterback, I've got Josh Allen. At running back, I've got Derrick Henry. At wide receivers, I've got Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp. Tight end, I've got Travis Kelce. Offensive tackle, I've got Trent Williams and Ryan Ramczyk. Offensive guard, I've got Zach Martin and Elgton Jenkins. And at center, I've got Corey Linsley. So that is going to do it for today's podcast. Thank you very much for listening. And in next episode, we're going to be covering defense and special teams rankings. I hope you enjoyed, and tweet me at Football by Nico to be updated every time a new episode of the podcast drops. You can follow me at Football by Nico on Twitter. Thanks so much for listening.